You know, they never tell you which way you're gonna come out of these tubes, and it's like I'm wondering. Oh. You know, I was gonna come out of this wearing like a full Mario outfit, but I figured that'd be a little bit of like stolen valor. I'm not Italian, and I don't need the mafia coming after me, at least not for a stupid video game video. Hi, I'm Guard. I am the one who made these 2-hour-long videos about my favorite little blue rat, and another one about like Christian mice during Christmas, but you don't have to watch that one if you don't want to. I'm proud of that video, but not that proud of it. And that title you saw is not clickbait whatsoever. These 4 games, some of the most influential and most cherished platformers of all time, I've never played any of them. I'm just waiting for the FBI to break in through my window at this point to take my gaming license, so I'm on a bit of a crunch here. All jokes aside, I've never touched more than like 10 minutes combined of all these games. I think I had Super Mario Bros. Deluxe for the Game Boy Color when I was much younger. Whether or not you think that counts, I barely have any memories beyond like the second world. Even then, it's all a haze between having Spider-Man and Batman action figures fighting Sonic toys. Meanwhile, I think I played the port of the US Super Mario Bros. 2 on the GBA for like 5 minutes at a console kiosk at Target. I remember just switching between all the characters and being confused why I could ride on the enemies' heads. Then I just left and waddled around Target for an hour with my mom, only to forget the memory until just now. The brain is a fickle thing. Our memories are just figments of time. Only Mario is eternal. But yeah, in terms of the overall experience of these games, I've just never touched them. Of course, I've seen the games played through osmosis, through like streams or YouTube videos. I'm not totally blind to all of them, but more so I've never been the one in control of this Italian stallion here, if that makes any sense. It's not even that I never wanted to play them, it's just I never really had a Nintendo console in the house until a certain point. The NES and the SNES, I don't think we ever even owned one, at least not that I can rightly recall. Before the 3D era of games began, all I remember having was a Genesis where my indoctrination with the Sonic cult began. We had a Genesis, my grandmother had a Genesis, and I didn't really know anyone that had like a Nintendo console when I was a kid. Even the kindergarten I went to had a Genesis of all things. I was just never intended to be on Nintendo's side during the original console wars. I was a mid-90s kid, so the games I feel most nostalgic for in my life are like Jak and Daxter or Sly Cooper. PS2 and GameCube were the big consoles I remember playing the most when I was young. I vaguely remember us having an N64 and a Dreamcast at some point, but the latter of the two never really worked for some reason. The games I do remember playing were like Chameleon Twist, Goemon 64, and some weird Duck Dodgers game, among a bunch of other random bullshit you'd find at Blockbuster. That's right, I've played Chameleon Twist and Goemon 64, but I've never played Super Mario World. I'm just making more of a case for them to level my house with a nuke as I speak. It's not really an exaggeration though. If it came out before like the PS2 or the GameCube, it was probably never really on my radar. So many of the games that people would consider the greatest of all time, I've just never had any experience with. While I did have a Genesis, most of the memories I have of that were playing Sonic 1 through 3 extremely poorly. I think I also had some sort of Power Rangers fighting game, but I really have the haziest of memories of barely playing it. When I look at the lists people make of like the greatest games of all time or the best Nintendo games or whatever have you, I realize how many of them I just haven't played. Practically anything on the NES or the SNES just didn't exist to me before I saw them on like YouTube or streams. I'm sure I played some games on the N64 through rentals, as I do have memories of a tiny bit of Majora's Mask and I love Banjo-Kazooie a ton. I knew emulation was a thing, but I didn't really have my own computer until like high school. I didn't really start dabbling with emulators until recently when I wanted to start expanding my palette, so to speak. Before I really struck out on the internet, games were kind of just this magical thing that ended up existing. I would just go to a store or Blockbuster and find brand new games sitting on the shelf to try. Oh, Tonic Trouble for the N64? Sure, that sounds really fun. Yes, I've played Tonic Trouble, which was a Rayman 2 prototype game they put on the Nintendo 64 before I played something like Star Fox. But today, I think we're going to change some of that. I wouldn't really call this something like a retrospective since I don't really have any nostalgia for these games. More so, I want to kind of take a look at these games from a first-timer's perspective, if that makes any sense. And to do that, I'm going to structure the video kind of like this. Each section of the video going forward for now is going to be an individual game. I'm going to play these games in order of their release, starting with the original Super Mario Bros. But instead of playing them all at once in a shotgun blast and writing about them all, I'm going to write about my experiences after I finish each one. So, the section about Super Mario Bros. 1 will only be written about that game and no other context of the other three. When I finish one game, I'm going to stop and write about it before I move on to the next, so don't expect me to compare these games too much until we get further into the video, since I'll only have played that game in this section and any of the ones before it. For some ground rules though, I won't be covering Donkey Kong or the original Mario Bros. Arcade game. Not only because I've played both of these before, probably the biggest reason, but more because I feel interested in playing the actual platforming games themselves. Not that these two games weren't iconic in their own rights, but I feel more connection to the games that would put Mario Bros. Into the household more recognizably. Secondly, I won't be covering some of the more spin-offs or side games during this era just yet. I'd love to talk about the games like Mario Kart or Golf or even Yoshi's Island, but I feel like I want to just stick with the original 4 platformers on the main consoles. Later on, I'd absolutely love to expand outwards and see what these other games were like too. But for now, I'm just going to focus on the plumber's main early adventures. Sound fair? Since the Super Mario movie has now graced the theaters, I figured I'd take back a look at the manga so I can complain about the anime, if you will. Consider this me inviting you along the journey if you'd like, and seeing the games as I do for the first time. This is where I was going to do like a let's-a go type thing in a Mario voice, but I kind of know my range, so I'll just let Chris Pratt do it for me.
Mushroom Kingdom, here we come!
Super Mario Bros. 1, the classic to end all classic platformers. I mean, really, who hasn't played this game? Oh, right. This game is the most video game of video game out there. It's the game that pretty much convinced grandmothers for almost 20 years that every video game was a Nintendo. Unless you were my grandmother, who, when I asked for a Ninja Turtles game for Christmas, I got a Scooby-Doo one. But listen, when you're 10, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. You play that Scooby-Doo game until you break that disc. I can't think of another game aside from like Sonic that's had as much cultural impact and representation throughout society. I mean, I guess that could apply to Mario as a whole, just how much he's influenced pop culture. If you need an easy joke about like video games or video game related humor, Mario is probably your go-to. I think that's because, well, look at it. It's simple and easily recognizable, iconic in its sheer simplicity. It's the type of style that's so incredibly easy to replicate either for bootlegs or for non-copyright infringing video games on TV shows. The music is so catchy and recognizable, I think everyone has the 1-1 theme permanently ingrained in their subconscious even if they've never played it. I distinctly have this weird VH1 TV show clip stuck in the back of my head from years and years ago, where they were like talking about iconic music or something like that. And I remember being high up on the list was the Mario 1-1 song and all these celebrities talking about how influential it was. Even though I hadn't touched this game before this video, it's impossible to ignore just how influential it really is. It's a game that's inspired countless spin-offs and improvements for platformers. It's a game that seemed to have skyrocketed the concept of the mascot platformer to begin with. And, in a way, I think its existence is what shot the culture of video gaming into its rock-solid state with pop culture in many ways. It's Mario, it's Mr. Video Game himself. What else do you need it to be? Alright, now that all that Mario praising is out of the way, I've got some spicy gamer opinions to drop. I really didn't like playing this game all that much. Is that a bad opinion to have? Am I about to get killed? Now, before the Nintendo assassins put the red dot on my forehead, allow me to explain a little bit. I don't think this game is bad at all. I still think it's an influential piece of software for a reason. But when you play it for the first time and you keep playing it, you realize why there were so many innovations in the platforming field. I was under the impression that I was going to beat Mario 1 in like an hour, just crush through it and move on to Mario 2 easy peasy, you know? So far, at the time of this writing, I've gotten 2 hours in and only gotten to World 5-3 on my best attempt using Warp Zones. I think this game kind of shot my gamer confidence a little bit. I mean, I've beaten Elden Ring, surely I can handle a few turtles and Goombas, yeah? No, I was not ready for Mario Boot of Mushroom. I wouldn't say any specific enemies or stages were outright my bane. The only enemy that gave me any hassle were the occasional Hammer Bros. Even then, I sort of learned how to deal with them. Instead, the biggest hurdle of the game is just Mario himself. I was wholly unprepared for how it feels to control this Italian wrecking ball. Somehow, at the exact same time, it feels like someone put cinder blocks onto Mario's shoes, but also greased up those cinder blocks with ragu. It really feels like you're revving up a car in neutral sometimes. Mario takes forever to get going, but when he does, by God, can that plumber move. Unfortunately, he also forgot how to stop. I can't tell you how many times I died just from the sheer momentum of Mario running headfirst into a pit. Mario, I know it's your first real platformer outing, but you gotta lay off the cannoli, my man. That dumpy of yours has so much mass, it's proving Newton's laws of physics. The Because of how this combination of momentum and weight felt, there were many times I felt like I just was confused on how to approach obstacles. Flat levels were mostly fine, or at least levels where there wasn't much climbing, but in some of the stages with the tall mushroom platforms, yeah, I can't say I ever felt gravity's influence more than I have in that instance. It's a balancing act of making sure you're going fast enough to make it high or far enough, but not so fast that you're going to completely overshoot it or slide off the edge. And while I've had more experience with Mario's blue counterpart, I don't know, I never felt like Sonic's shoes were soaked in chili grease. It's really hard to stop and go in this game. You have to fully commit to a jump and live with the consequences of your actions. Even if those actions involve watching Mario Clone 192 fall into the abyss never to be seen again. And I gotta say, I don't think any other video game's game over screen has given me as much psychological damage as this one. You know, you're just running around doing your best to get further and further in the game. You're in your last life, and you know you're farther than you've ever been before. Just get a few more coins, few more points to make it a little bit further. And then Mario's ass mask just swings, and you can't stop it, and the game over jingle plays, and you just kind of feel yourself break down a little bit. And you just sit there. You stare at the screen for a while, wondering if you should start at the very beginning again. Wondering if it's worth it to even try and beat this game, if the people online will call you a fake gamer for never finishing Mario 1. But then, you hit that start button again and you push forward. It's that exact feeling I started to have creep in with each loss. While I was frustrated, each loss made me feel more determined to get further than before, learning where the items and lives could be gained, trying to figure out where the best patterns and levels to blast through. It's an experience of feeling yourself get better with each and every attempt, learning the optimal paths and best places to boost through damage or get some extra points. When you get a flow going and you get a handle on this Paisano's girth, you feel like you could just blast through anything. At least, until some magic pixel bullshit ruins your flow and crumbles your psyche to dust again. Seriously, some of the deaths I've had at some of the enemies here drove me wild. I had to play back the footage on some of these just to confirm what had killed me here. Sometimes it was just the cheek of a Goomba, sometimes I had bumped into a Koopa's nose at just the wrong angle. Other times, it's a super positional hammer that was nowhere near Mario and he just falls over. I can only assume it was a heart attack by watching this fucking turtle moonwalk into a brick as he throws this thing, which, in fairness, same. Aside from Mario's momentum, the weird hitboxes on, well, a lot of things, was the second biggest hurdle I faced. So many objects, enemies, even the terrain itself have a deceptive hitbox size. Some either are far larger than you would expect, like in the case of the various enemies and their attacks. Others are much smaller, leading to weird moments like this Cheep Cheep bouncing up underneath the bridge. That fish assassin had me dead to rights, but I guess he just clipped Mario's heel just enough to get booted away. I was more scared of this hallway with 3 Goombas in it in level 4-2 than I was in most of the game. And it wasn't so much because I didn't think I could handle them, but more because I wasn't sure if I was ever going to overshoot or undershoot their hitboxes. Because I'd done both before, and it caused me to start playing extremely cautiously. For 3 Goombas. Normally I'd just jump over all 3 of these and call it a day, but they put them in such a small hallway that you just have to stop and be scared of these expert hitmen. Maybe this is just me being a bit of a smug mid-90s shithead, but I'm really glad I didn't have this cannoli meatball torture device as a game when I was growing up. It feels like an endurance test. Like, if this was the only game I had growing up, I would probably just keep at it day after day until I eventually beat it. But I've just been so spoiled by the concept of save points and game overs that don't just boot you back to the very beginning of the game because you had the gall not to play perfectly the first time. Listen, I'll say it for you before you put in the comments. Skill issue, I know. I'm kind of being hyperbolic about it. It's still not a bad game necessarily, it's just a game that has a lot of limitations. It's a product of the time, it's a product of the hardware that they had to work with, and what they do have here is really remarkable. It's just a shame that most of the things I like about the game have nothing to do with the actual, gameplay of the game. Every advancement needs some sort of flashpoint in order to spring off of so that we can get something new and better. Most of it comes down to the way that the game looks or sounds, like I mentioned earlier. Even if I had never played this game on my own, there's this almost comfortable familiarity when you boot up the game and you start running around. Though all the backgrounds look like something I could make in Paint today, it's still so charming and perfect for the game's look. Same with the audio effects, the sounds of the jump, the crunchy audio of when the bricks crumble apart, even just something small like the coin or bouncing on an enemy's head. Everything is just so perfectly iconic that even if playing the game itself feels like I'm pulling teeth, it was never making me feel angry or annoyed. Also, I have a fondness for the original look of these coins. They just look really nice. The pixel art is so good, you could just see the shine off of these bad boys. I'm sure with plenty of time and experience with the game, I could be able to get to the end with great difficulty. Even in just the few hours I played before writing up this section of the video, I could feel myself improving. But I was extremely foolish to think that I would be able to just blast through this game like I was some sort of seasoned speedrunner. As if I hadn't watched the Summoning Salt video all about the speedruns of Mario 1. In total, I've only got about 3 hours at the time of writing this, whereas the most professional of professionals have hundreds if not thousands more. Playing what I have of Mario 1 has given me a new appreciation for those that play it so flawlessly. I, personally, could not imagine continuing to play this realistic Italian simulator for so long. You see people speed through this game in regular speedruns or in Mario Maker levels, and I just always thought it looked like a cakewalk. Like, yeah, you just learn when and where to jump, it's easy. But now that I've experienced it a little bit, I can't help but salute the brave soldiers in those tortellini trenches. That said, I don't feel great about leaving the game unfinished just yet, so instead I'm gonna make a little bit of a compromise. I will be moving on to the next part of the video looking at Super Mario Bros. 2, but I'm not going to simply leave this game unfinished. At the end of each of the next sections, I'll give a tiny little update about how I'm doing on the first game here, hopefully having beaten it by the end of the video. Please, please God, let me have beaten it by the end of the video. But please, stick around, watch me put my expert gaming skills to work and beat this masterpiece. Or Descent into Mario Madness, we'll see which one. Now I know Super Mario Bros. 2 is a bit of a weird topic depending on which version of the game I'm talking about. There's the one that's originally from Japan called the Lost Levels, which is technically the spiritual successor to 1, but then there's also the Super Mario Bros. 2 that the United States got instead. And if you want to figure out which one I'm going to be playing, I guess you'll just have to wait to the next part. Or you saw the picture in the thumbnail, in which case, good eye. So I trained an AI chatbot on YouTube Video Game Humor, and I thought I would use it to introduce this section of the video. I haven't read this yet, so hopefully it'll be really funny for all of us. Hey guys, did you know that Super Mario Bros. 2 is a reskin of Doki Doki Panic? Isn't that really fun and interesting? I think they're underselling how artificial this intelligence really is. This page is blank, I've lied to you. Jokes aside, yeah, I'm gonna be talking about the Mario Bros. 2 that the US got and not the Lost Levels. I've got two reasons for why that is, and I hope they make some sense. First off, well, from what I understand of Lost Levels, while it is the original sequel to Mario Bros. 1, it took a good while for it to release in the West. So, were I to have grown up around the time of the NES, I would have had the Doki Doki reskin instead. And I'd rather played them in order in which I would have played them when I grew up, if that makes any sense. But also, and this might sound a little harsh, but Lost Levels is just Mario 1 again, but harder. And I'm already having a hard enough time with the original game. I did play a little bit of it just to make sure I felt the way I felt about it, but like, you know those Mario Maker levels that are just designed to piss you off and for no other reason than just to make you mad? That's what the Lost Levels feels like, and I don't want to subject myself to that for another 3 hours. Shit, maybe Nintendo of America was right. Maybe I am the type of gamer that would have thought this game was too hard. If you want another real reason, I just think that Mario Bros. 2 is more interesting to talk about. The look, the gameplay, the music, it's all such a departure that I can't help but feel drawn to it. I'm sure I could just ramble on again about how Lost Levels is more Mario 1 and how I think Mario 1 isn't all that fun to play. But personally, I prefer to see how the series improves and changes rather than just playing what would be a full-price DLC from Nintendo today. I don't think I ever really realized how many of my favorite things from the Mario series came from this game. The game's main theme in the stages is one of my all-time favorite songs in the series. It's always gotten stuck in my head whenever I heard it. I remember playing the Smash song that had this stage in it when I was a kid just to listen to it. It also has some of my favorite enemies too, with the Shy Guys. I always really liked their super simplistic design and the wide range of colors they would eventually get. But even outside of my overall favorites, there's a lot of Mario staples that I never knew really started from this game. Or at least I think they did, with characters like the Shy Guys or the Sniffets and the little Ninjas. And I think this is the first appearance of the Pokies too? And of course you can't forget about the argument-inducing Birdo, a character that would go down in infamy in multiple online forums and Twitter threads for decades to come. I think just having these new enemies was a great call as it helps differentiate this game from the one before it. It's a whole different world, a whole different land, and little things like character choice and music can go a long way to show that. While the music doesn't have as much variety as I might like, or perhaps as much as I'd expect, I think I prefer the songs here over the first game. They feel livelier and more whimsical. Like I said before, the base level theme is one of my favorite Mario songs in the whole series. Meanwhile, the cave theme sounds so funky. I never hated going into caves or indoor areas whenever I had to. And I know this is kind of a small thing, since I know this is an NES soundtrack, but damn if the percussion in the back of the arrangement doesn't sound like it's a straight recording of drums at times. Even the level appearances as a whole feel wildly improved over the first game. Each zone has its own specific theming and background elements that go with them. While they don't have specific world themes, I could immediately tell what kind of world I was in, or what the various elements inside of the caves and buildings looked like. I sure do love entering a little cave only to have it look like a torture dungeon. Did anyone else play the Aladdin game for the Genesis? It reminds me a lot of the dungeon level from that game. The sprites for the characters in this game were just so charming as hell too. Mario and Luigi look the most like their promotional art that they've ever looked, at least in my opinion. Toad kind of looks like a weird cosplayer. He's really chunky and kind of strange looking. I like him, but he's weird. Meanwhile, Toadstool definitely has a weird shrimp thing going on with her back. I think she needs to go see a chiropractor real bad. Also, she looks bored as hell, and she has no interest in this whimsical adventure she's going on. Overall, the appearance and presentation of this game is just such a treat, so much more character than the original. It's not even that the original wasn't delightful in its own way, but this one has so much more going for it that I enjoyed running around and finding each level's secrets. That's not even to talk about the game itself. I really thought I would end up not liking the departure from the normal platforming. But I'll be damned, this game has just as many changes as the presentation, and I think they're all for the better. The first departure from the original is being able to choose which character you even want to play with. While Mario and Luigi were palette swaps of each other up until a certain point, this is probably the game that established some conventions of the characters we'd see even to this day. Mario is the all-rounder with decent speed, jump, everything like that. Luigi is the bit wackier version of Mario, with about the same speed from what I could tell, but his jump is a lot floatier than that of his brothers. Toad is generally a bit faster than these two, but his jump feels a bit slower than the plumbers. And Peach, while her speed and jump isn't the best of any of the others, she can float midair for a while and break some situations here and there. I really like having the choice of all these different characters. I'm sure if you were really, really good at the game, you would be able to choose which character you want for each specific level to blast through it that much easier. For the sake of the video, I stuck with Mario just because he's the all-rounder and I wanted to see as much of the game as I could. I'm sorry, Luigi. I just wasn't strong enough for your moon shoes this time. Please forgive me. Now, I came into this one knowing it would be different than the original game by a fair bit. Even if you've never played it, if you're even remotely aware of the game's existence, you know it's the odd one out of these four games. And because of that, I was expecting to not really mesh with the gameplay all too well. I mentioned before playing like 10 minutes of the remake, remaster, whatever on the Game Boy and a Target when I was a kid. And the one thing I remember was being confused about why I couldn't just jump on a Shy Guy's head and crush them into blood wine under my boot. But honestly, I really like this gameplay a lot. It's slower, but it feels more deliberately designed. Again, that's not to say the original game wasn't well designed. Each level still felt like it was created with intentional challenge, but because of the way Mario played, it was often easier to just ignore the challenge outright. But with the challenges to the gameplay here, it requires you to look at the levels in a different way. You can't just run and bounce off enemies to keep you moving. You interact with the enemies in the world in a more direct way. Instead of crushing the skulls of your enemies underfoot, you take all the autonomous control away from their body. You land on top of them, flex your big Paisano power, and suddenly, you have a new baby boy in your hands. Suddenly you can turn the unsuspecting Shy Guy into a living cannonball, and it feels fun every time you can combo these tosses together. This new mechanic of grabbing when you're on top of something changes the whole way the game asks you to interact with it. Puzzles and bosses are suddenly built around picking up items and tossing them back at them. In the grand scheme of things, yeah, it's mostly just changing one mechanic for another. They've replaced the bouncing on top of enemies' heads with picking them up. You still have to get on top of them, but the way you deal with them changes the whole game. Having to pick up and throw something as your main mode of attack leads you to consider the best opportunity. Like, Birdo is an easy enemy to beat, but you can't just immediately pick up the egg and toss it against them in later versions. You have to deal with the multiple eggs and fireballs she shoots to make sure you're not about to get clipped by the next barrage. Same with the little rat boss with the bombs. He's just so frantic when you're trying to pick up the bombs as he's throwing more and more of them that you're running out of room to stand. Stop fucking throwing these bombs, I'm having trouble with the ones you've already given me! The pickup mechanic applies to the rest of the game as well. You see these little leaves on the ground everywhere, you can just pluck turnips out of them whenever you want. I thought it was such a weird mechanic that Peach had when I was a kid in Melee that I just didn't know what it meant. Like, I thought they just made up an ability for her because they needed something for her to throw. But I get it now. The raw power of turnips. War will never be the same. One of the things I did know about this was this little potion you can find in the ground. I think I remember watching the Game Grumps play this game years and years ago now. I thought this was going to be the mechanic that pissed me off to no end, but surprisingly I enjoyed it a lot. It felt like a better reward for knowing when to use them for bigger life pool as well as an extra life chance at the end of a level. It's a better incentive for learning and remembering the secret rewards in the game, more so than Mario 1 where there weren't exactly many hidden or rewarding things to find. You barely have the chances to find 1-ups anywhere, and most of the rewards that would help were various power-ups, and while useful, they're not quite as useful as having extra lives in order to actually progress and get better at the game. I know, skill issue. But genuinely, I really enjoyed figuring out where best to use these door potions and to get the most out of them. While 1-ups at the end weren't guaranteed, even just having more opportunities to get them were incentive enough. I'd say overall the lives and the retry system in Mario 2 is more forgiving, but that brutal game over punishment of starting the game over as a whole is still a kick in the balls. It's sort of the reason I never really went back to a lot of the older NES and SNES games because they were so infamously difficult. I'd love to try the older Castlevanias, but I admit my own baby brain is worried that I wouldn't have anywhere near the skill to beat them. These classic titles are a war of attrition, something you just clench your jaw and power through with sheer force of will. I mean, I'm not saying I don't like a challenge. I played Doom Eternal on Nightmare, I really enjoyed Elden Ring, hell I beat the hardest levels on Mario 3D World and Odyssey because I thought they were fun. But being sent back to the very beginning of the game doesn't always feel like the most fair or fun punishment. In games like Hades or The Binding of Isaac where each run through of the game is going to be different, resetting the stakes back to 0 makes sense. In platforms, it feels so needlessly soul-crushing to get so far into the game only to be sent back to the beginning because it doesn't save the farthest point you got to. At least in Mario 2, the retry system is there. When you run out of lives, it takes you back to the beginning of the world. But if you run out of retries, it sends you back to the very beginning of the game. You better get your ass back in gear if you want to figure out where everything went wrong, idiot. Overall, for a game that was mostly to please an overseas market that might have found lost levels too hard, I think this game has a lot of great charm and legacy. I can see where systems in this game would go on to influence other games in the future. The whole idea of using your enemies as ammo or attacks is a great idea, one that would get reprised in so many other games in the future. Things like Mischief Makers or Klonoa come to mind, where your enemies are also your biggest asset. But even something smaller like the mask that chases after you when you pick up the key. I don't know if this is something that directly influenced it, but I can't help but see how this would develop into the Wario Land staple of escape level sequences. I've come to appreciate a game that is something of a black sheep amongst the rest of the franchise. I didn't think I would enjoy it all that much after my not great introduction to classic Mario, but I'll be damned. The gameplay is fun, the worlds and the enemies are all unique and interesting, and I just had a blast playing through this game. And if this is a sign of things to come for the rest of the series, I'm really excited for what comes next. As I understand it, there's something of a debate between Mario and 3 and World about which one is better, and I'm really excited to see what I feel about both of them. I'm also excited to not please either side, so let's get ready for that. I've still gotten a little hard stuck around 5-3. I think I've gotten to the 5-4 castle a few times, and it's made me realize that a lot of the level design really isn't that difficult. My biggest downfall has been, by and large, Mario's fucking dumpy. Like, he just keeps clapping on down Bowser's castle walls like there's an all-you-can-eat pizza place down there. I know I mentioned it in the main section of the video, but fuck, it's rough, man. It is really rough. Like, you're just going down the castle and there's a pit up ahead. Mario's eyes lock onto that pit, and then he does his best God of War 3 Kratos impression and dives on in. Like, if there were Olympic swimming judges, they would give him all 10s for how fast he just plummets. I was having a bit of a hard time coming up with an intro for this section, so I think I'll start it off with a fun fact. Did you know that Mario 3 has been in more movies than Mario has had theatrical releases? Like, obviously everyone remembers the classic gamer film The Wizard. It showed off how bad the Power Glove was. But did you know that Mario 3 was also in Vanilla Ice's movie Cool as Ice? Yeah, you can hear the music and see a little bit of the gameplay right after Vanilla Ice says he wants to about a high school girl he just met. Listen, this was the game's legacy before I played it, just let me have this. After how thoroughly abused I've been so far by Mario 1, I was really worried about going back to a purely platforming game. Mario 2, while it was a departure from the norm, also didn't have completely ball-shatteringly difficult demands. It wasn't easy, but it still had elements that made it far less punishing than the original. But with Nintendo coming back to their platforming roots, I was terrified about having another Mario 1 experience. All there is to do is just boot up the game and hopefully do my best. Oh wow, oh man, this is just good. This is just fun. It's just good, fun, honest to goodness platformer. Oh, thank you, Plumber Jesus, thank you for this blessing. So yeah, Mario 3 is a very good game, absolutely nuclear take, I'm aware. I knew people really liked this game, they praised it to hell and back, but you can never really tell how good something is until you get your hands on it, you know? It feels like they really understood what did and didn't work in the first game. But in that understanding, they kind of just took whatever thought came out of Miyamoto's brain and put it onto the game. Like seriously, if Mario 2 had so much creative realization, Mario 3 is the culmination of throwing everything at the wall regardless of if it sticks. It's a wonderful evolution with so many decisions and unfiltered freedom for ideas. On the more basic side, we get new staples to the series like Thwomps, Bob-ombs, and Boos, and even the Tanuki suit. On the other side, it feels like they just took every crazy concept they had and went with it. Flying Goombas? Yeah, sure, but what if Flying Goomba that births smaller Goombas onto you while it flies? And what if those smaller Goombas were also their own enemy that hid in fake bricks? Or what if these Jack Beetles can just yeet bricks at you and hardly give a shit about if you're in the way? While the level appearances are a tiny bit more on the basic side at times, I don't think that's a problem either. It's varied enough in the level layouts and objectives to make up for it. Besides, the new overworld map helps a hell of a lot to ground all of that bing bing wahooing you're doing. It's nice to get that tangible grasp of how far you've gone into a world, but also as to what kind of level you're going to be going into next. And the music. All these games have insanely good and catchy music, almost to a fault. The first level's theme rivals even Mario 1's 1-1 theme, I think. It's just that good. But even beyond that, there's the meme song. You know exactly which meme song I'm talking about. I'm gonna play a few seconds of it so you know which meme song I'm talking about. Yeah, that one. That meme song. It's been stuck in my head since I finished the game. Now it's going to be in yours forever. I've cursed you. Each level tries to introduce some sort of new mechanic or enemy in your path to spice up the classic platforming, and I think it works wonderfully. While the objective is always getting to the very end of the stage, it's not simply just a matter of going to the right anymore. Levels have become more complex, sort of a combination between Mario 1's tight platforming with Mario 2's more complex, sprawling design. Some levels will take you across multiple screens through multiple doors and pipes just to get you through the level. Others will simply just have you slide down slopes or avoid a fish trying to eat you while the waters rise and fall. This game uses the basic framework that Mario 1 held, but makes so much more of its world and carefully crafted levels. Like, why would you want to go back and play Mario 1 when you have this game right here? It's everything Mario 1 wants to do, but so much more fun. While a lot of the stages are short, at least earlier on in the game, they make the most out of their time without overstaying their welcome. A challenge is presented before you, you learn the best way to get through it, and you move on. I think what influences my decision is that, while he's still heavy and he still has a lot of momentum, there were far less moments where I felt like I was out of control. He still has a bit of junk in the trunk like his Mario 2 design, but they cleaned all the marinara off of his feet. There were no moments where I felt like I was going to slide off the stage or I couldn't stop exactly where I wanted to. Finally, we've reached functional Italian simulation. Not perfect, but functional. The Ford Model T of Italians, if you will. And it's because of the more precise control of Mario that I feel the level design really shines. There's so many more levels that focus on tight, precision platforming challenges rather than just sprinting straight to the end. If this were Mario 1 or Lost Levels, I'd be taking out the Nutcracker since that'd be a more interesting way to spend an afternoon. There's this level later on in the game where you can either bounce on all these flying beetles or land on the clouds for more safer platforming. But because I enjoyed bouncing around as Mario, I of course took more chances with the dangerous platforming. It's a risk I wouldn't have even considered doing when playing Mario 1. Lives are too incredibly sparse, and the controls are just obnoxious. It's not worth trying to do the crazier stunts or the precision jumps because you'd be punished far too hard. But in Mario 3, I didn't mind failing some of the crazier jumps because I knew I wouldn't lose all of my progress entirely. The punishment for the game over is still a little harsh, but it's not as punishing as 1 or 2 was. You're never forced to fully restart the game from World 1, but if you get a game over, you do have to start over from the beginning of the world you're in. For some of those worlds, I don't think it'd be all that bad, but, well, let's just say I used some special functions on my extra powerful Real Nintendo Entertainment System TM to get me through World 7 and World 8. But I really didn't use it for like 80% of the game because the game over punishment and 1-up distribution felt really fair. In Mario 1 and Mario 2, 1-ups were extremely rare to an almost detrimental degree. Like, yeah, I could find 1-ups in Mario 1, but as far as I've gotten in my playthrough, I've only had like 5 on hand at once. Meanwhile, in Mario 3, I've stocked upwards of like 20, and that was just like casually playing. You can find them plenty in the levels themselves, usually tucked away in hidden away places, but smartly, Nintendo added ways to gain lives just by playing through the game and progressing. Getting to the end of the stage rewards you with a card, so every 3 levels you're guaranteed an extra life regardless of which cards you get. If you get matching cards though, you get way more, and getting 3 star cards is pure dopamine I never thought possible from a Mario game. Aside from those, mushroom houses and overworld events give you extra lives and items to help out too. It's why, even if you restart a world, it never feels quite so punishing because you at least have some extra cushion. It feels like they learned from how obnoxious the game over was in Mario 1 and went, maybe we don't want to castrate everyone playing the game. Hell, they even made it worth going after the coins. There's enough coins per level that you're likely to get a 1-up pretty often. That said, this is the part where I'm probably going to upset a lot of people who really love this game. While I think the first 2/3 of the game are phenomenal, the last 2 to 3 worlds are severely lacking. I don't mean from a visual or musical standpoint, those are still very much on point, but it's more, it felt like the last few worlds were running out of ideas as to what made the levels unique or challenging. To compensate, they either made levels that were extremely dense with obstacles or overly obtuse with the objective. Please write in the comments down below how wrong I am now. I still think that Mario 3 is an amazing game, and I wish I would have had this game when I was a kid. I feel like I missed out on something really special, but I feel like my experience with video games has been enriched by playing it. That said, Pipe World and the Koopa/Dark World are ass. A lot of the level design in World 7 and World 8 is the antithesis of what a lot of the game has built up to this point. While levels that had less straightforward and more puzzle-focused objectives exist, they were never outright this obtuse. The first fortress in World 7 is extremely confusing, even if the atmosphere it sets up is really interesting. It's a castle with no enemies, no obstacles other than a few jumps over a lava pit. It's up to you to figure out where to go. Except the solution is to find this specific block amongst all the others, hit the P-switch, go to this specific door, get the Tanuki suit, fly to this random spot on the ceiling in the main hall, and fight Boom Boom. A lot of World 7 turns out this way. 7-7 has this extremely tight timer for a normal player to have to deal with, having to get every star in pretty much perfect timing, unless you get the stars to bounce a little bit, but even still. The level immediately afterwards, meanwhile, has so many tight timings between piranha plants and spike balls that even a single misstep means you have to go right back to the beginning. I really started to miss level checkpoints around this point. Yeah, I know, skill issue again, but it's not something the game has really done to this point. If there were more levels that had really tight or precision platforming, I wouldn't have this much problem with it. But because the game didn't have that really gradual increase in difficulty, I feel like I was blindsided by so many of these last stages. Many of the stages in the last few worlds feel like they were designed to be difficult first and enjoyable second. World 8, again while it is still very difficult, still feels deliberately designed in more straightforward ways. It's just unfortunate that the design generally boils down to throwing many projectiles onto the screen. Many of the airship levels in other worlds felt like this too, but never quite to this extreme. The tanks and the airships here just feel like they have very specific paths that they want you to take through it, and deviating off of it in any way will kill you. They've also become extremely sparse when it comes to item blocks and lives here, likely to try and keep you game overing and starting the world over again. It's not that difficulty is an issue, that's not what I'm saying here. It's that the difficulty comes after almost 6 worlds of reasonable, deliberately designed challenge. Design and objectives that hadn't appeared before this point came in full force at the end of the game. And while I still really loved what I played and don't regret getting to the end, I can't say I'm particularly interested in playing past like World 6 again. It's like, why are the tanks and the airships so much harder than any other boss? The challenge feels all over the place in terms of consistency. Like, most of the levels are really well designed, but the further you get into the game, the more it starts to fall apart. The first half of the game is really well balanced in terms of its fun and challenging aspects, but the later half of the game just feels like it's all falling apart. It felt like 2 different teams that were making levels, but none of them talk to each other. In one example, there's this stage early on where you're moving from platform to platform and there's these Cheep-Cheeps bouncing underneath you. And smartly, the developers in this stage make sure you know that these ones, the ones bouncing up and down, these are the ones that are going to leap at you. It's a telegraphed attack that you can notice if you're paying attention. It's something that you still have to deal with, but it's designed in such a way that you can actively learn and notice the pattern. Meanwhile, in one of the tank stages near the end of the game, there's so many cannons here that look exactly the same that it's incredibly easy to forget what they shoot. Some of them just shoot the cannonballs straight up in a diagonal pattern, but others fire bomb mobs out of them. There's no indicator of which ones are which, so it leads to this cycle of death, trying to remember which identical cannon is which and hoping you got it right. By the end, you're left with levels that have so many cannonballs and bullet bills and wrenches throwing onto the screen that you get an actual slowdown. Or you'll get a castle that you have to test which doors to go into, and if you look away for half a second, it puts you onto a tiny conveyor belt that dumps you into lava. Absolute Mario Maker level behavior. Might as well put a baby laugh or a little noise over my death. I really enjoyed my time with Mario 3. It felt like the kind of game I was hoping that Mario 1 would end up being. If you're like me and you haven't played any of these games, well, still start with Mario 2 because I think it's a lot of fun even if it's different. But Mario 3 is like the perfect point to start at. When you see how far things progress between Mario 1 and Mario 3, you understand why innovation was so sorely needed in this genre. The original is still a good starting point to sort of understand where we all come from and how we all improve, but I can't say I would recommend it over Mario 3 at any point. It's just the superior game overall. With all the praise out of the way, I have to wonder what Mario World is going to be like. The jump between Mario 1 and Mario 3 was so huge that I have to assume that it's going to be even bigger here. Like, we're going to be on new hardware now. There's so much that they can do with this game that they couldn't do with the previous ones. And I can't wait to upset the people who think this one is better or this one is worse. Maybe Toadstool will be able to finally sit this one out. She still looks so bored. So I've gotten to about World 6. Was it World 7 at this point? The levels blend together because there's so little that distinguishes each one between one another. In Mario 2 and Mario 3, I could name a few levels that stand out that I remember because there's a lot of them that have unique or interesting moments in them. But by the time you get to like World 2, if you're doing that route, you've seen everything the game will throw at you. Aside from like the Hammer Brothers and the Lakitu later on, you've seen everything. There's nothing else that is new in this game, so everything just keeps repeating and repeating like this fucked up Italian Groundhog's Day. But I've kind of started to understand how to play the game a little bit better. You have to slow down and take stock of where you are going. I know that sounds stupid and kind of like, yeah, no shit, but the levels are set up in such a way where there's so many levels that are just flat. And you can gun it. You can gun it straight down the level if you want to. But that's Miyamoto's little jape. If you don't stop to think, if you try to go on instinct and get to the end of the level, you're fucked. You are going to be a ravioli stain at the end of a pit. But I won't let him win. I won't let Mario beat me. I refuse. Guys, I have some really terrible news to share with you all. Princess Toadstool was kidnapped again. I know, I thought she was really safe this time. We had the best people protecting her. But we all have to just live with this now. We have to take this one day at a time with this stressful situation and we'll get through it together. So here we are at the final stop on our little Mario excursion with Super Mario World. I know I've skipped over a few other games here and there, like the Mario Land series on Game Boy. And while I would like to talk about those games in the future, as well as things like Yoshi's Island, I think capping it off with Mario World is a good bookend. It marks something of a turning point for the whole series. It started with Mario 3's upgrades to the formula, but it's clear they knew that this needed to be a huge leap. So many new technological tricks were available now thanks to the power of the Super Nintendo. Like, these two games only came out about 2 years apart, and just looking at the two you can see how much that advancement helped. It's a little hard to not get swept up in appearances. I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but like, goddamn, this book is giving me the best fuck me eyes I've ever seen. I mean, this is the first game that had music at its title screen instead of a soundless void, so like, that's a 10 out of 10 in my book. For the longest time, I only knew this game as the one that introduced Yoshi to the franchise. The deeper intricacies, specific level designs or enemies, things like that were completely foreign to me. Playing through all these games for the first time, I think I realized that I somehow knew the least about this game than any of the other ones. And I think that's strange since I would consider this the most popular of all four of these. Whether or not that's necessarily true, I can't say, but I think Mario World leaves a longer lasting impression than the previous three games. Of all these games, I think it's the first one that has a cohesive world realized. Because of the power of the NES, so much of the art can be fully brought to life. The bushes and the foliage all look like proper plants, the backgrounds look so stunningly gorgeous that I just want to get lost in them. At least when they're not moving at Mach 5 behind me, making me feel like I'm about to have a seizure. Everything in this game is just a treat to see. Each level is just as beautiful and engaging as the last. Anyone else think these boulders look delicious, by the way? They look like Cocoa Puffs or something. I just wanted to shovel them in my mouth. One moment you could be running through grassy fields or overgrown forests, bouncing from enemy to enemy, and then you'll be lost and at the mercy of many mansions throughout the land that have ghosts just infesting each one of them. Has anyone investigated why there's so many ghosts in Dinosaur Land? Is that a game theory yet? Can we get MatPat on the phone for that one? It seems right up his alley. Genuinely though, there's so many great set pieces in this game. While in previous games there was an effort to make each zone at least feel different than the others, I really do think that this is the one that put Mario into a league of his own. He was already Mr. Video Game, but there's something about this one that almost feels triumphant. There's a confidence that this game exudes where it almost knows how good it is. You can tangibly feel the pride the developers took in making almost every section of this game feel fun. And we all know what Reggie used to say, if it's not fun, shove it up your ass. The dumbest joke I have in this fucking video. Earlier, my biggest complaint in each of the games was just how Mario himself controlled. In Mario 1, he was heavy and slippery, making it really hard to do any precision platforming. In Mario 2, he's a lot more well balanced, but that game's not a lot about precision platforming. In Mario 3, he moves a lot more precise, but it feels like the level design used that fact against him in a lot of ways. And I thought that by the time I got to this game, I'd have a debate between whether I liked Mario 3 or Mario World more. But honestly, I couldn't put this game down, man. There's no debate whatsoever. By the time of writing this, I haven't gotten all the Star Road exits or anything like that yet, but I'm really close. I couldn't stop playing it. The controls to me are perfect. Mario is weighty where he needs to be, but he doesn't feel like he jumps too high or too far. But it's just floaty enough that you know you can get a real good flow with the movement. There are stages where you can just keep jumping and not stop for even a second if you're good enough. And while that's true for the other games too, this is the first one where it really felt like that game was built with that idea in mind. The people behind the design had a clear understanding of what Mario was capable of and made challenges that pushed the player's boundaries further and further. There are levels that often require you to know about alternate or advanced skills to progress, and in this case it never felt like the game was trying to mess with me as a player. I think that was what bothered me the most in Mario 3, where the game, especially in the later levels, started to forego interesting level design in favor of gimmick and overwhelming difficulty. Here, the game establishes very early on that levels often have multiple routes and hidden secrets. If you're clever or skilled enough, you'll be able to pick up on a lot of these just by intuition. And while I haven't found every single exit just yet in my playthrough, I did find at least half of the Star Road exits on my own so far. When you find those secret exits without help, there's a level of pride and satisfaction that just can't be beat. It feels like what Mario 3 was wanting to do with World 7, but executed properly. I still enjoy the third game quite a bit, but so many of those last few levels just love to keep kicking you while you're down. But the difficulty here felt consistent and even all the way through. There was no one level that stood out to me as particularly egregious or obnoxious. While there was the occasional roadblock in some levels that required you to find the secret exits to progress, it never felt like the game was asking something unreasonable. It's a game that, while a platformer that asks you to simply get to the end, encourages and rewards you for exploration. The first time I found the little minigame room where you hit the blocks and try to get them in the right order, I felt like I was given incentive to keep looking around. My objective for this part of the video is really just to beat Bowser so I could talk about the overall gameplay, but there's this nagging part in the back of my head that wants me to go back and find every exit and every secret. I'm the type of person that loves to perfect a game if he gets really into it, and this is the perfect game that's nagging at me to try and go back and perfect it. I could not put this game down, I'm telling you. A lot of Mario World reminds me of what I loved about Mario Odyssey or 3D World. It's a game that has unbridled creativity and confidence in what it's trying to accomplish. There's a clear vision that pulls every level together and ties it directly into the next one. You feel yourself improving level after level, you learn new skills that you can apply later on in more difficult, demanding stages. And even if you have some issues, the game is far more forgiving than any of the previous ones. After unique stages like ghost houses, fortresses, or castles, the game prompts you to save if you want. That means if you game over, it'll take you back to the point right after you finished it. And more often than not, you won't have a stretch of more than 2 or 3 levels at most before you get a save point. There's no more dying on level 11 of World 3 and having to start the entire thing over again. Or, you know, getting a game over in Mario 1 and considering how well a controller cord can be used as a noose. In Minecraft, of course. Can you tell I haven't beaten Mario 1? I will say that, from the perspective of a first-timer, some of the requirements to progress felt occasionally annoying. Again, never a moment where I felt like I couldn't push forward after a little thinking and exploration. At the same time, requiring the secret exits feels less like rewarding the player for thinking critically. In a zone like the Forest of Illusion, I can understand it as it's the main gimmick of that world, but when you're in the Chocolate Zone and it's required to find some secret exits in either level 2 or 3 to progress further, I don't know. It was fun figuring out where I needed to go, but it rubbed me the wrong way that it was mandatory in the first place. It was something I hadn't really mentioned a whole lot in Mario 3. I think I said something in passing, but there was the occasional requirement in levels to use specific items to progress. There was this one level where you had to know exactly which hole to fly up and with the Tanuki suit as well as a Koopa shell. While World at least sets up the fact that the game has secrets to find in more roundabout ways, I couldn't help but be reminded of some of the more obtuse requirements for Mario 3. Considering I got to the end of the game in like one sitting, I wouldn't say that was much of an issue. The only thing that stopped me from finishing the game in one go was it was just really late and I was tired. I got to Chocolate Land in like one sitting and I basically had to pull myself away from it before I kept playing. Alright, quick lightning round of things I liked that I couldn't figure out where to put. Alright, quick lightning round of a few different things I couldn't figure out where else to put them in the video. I think the enemy design in this game is some of the overall best in the series. Like, there are so many just memorable designs that you remember encountering throughout the game. I wish I could be half as cool as this Mega Mole guy. Like, this is the kind of energy I want to carry around with me every single day of my life. On the flip side, I think some of the bosses are incredibly hit or miss in both design and mechanics. I wouldn't say any boss, again, was particularly hard. Reznor was probably the only one I thought was kind of a unique encounter. Meanwhile, all the Koopa kids look not particularly great. Some of their damaged animations make them look like cats in their sprite art. That said, man, Nintendo made Mario just brutalize the Koopa kids this time, always booting them into lava and just making them burn. It's metal as fuck, though. I appreciate that they tried to make the Bowser fights more interactive this time around as opposed to Mario 1 and 3's fights with him. His hitbox just feels a little too precise to properly aim the little Koopa bots when you just have to kick them upwards. It still feels more threatening than previous fights with this oversized turtle. Like, just look at them when he pops out of the clown car. That is one of the most threatening sprites I've ever seen. Besides this sprite of Mario just clocking Yoshi in the back of the head, he really just does give it a wind-up, huh? I always thought it was just like, you know, one of those urban legend things, but no, he really just donkey punches this poor dinosaur to get that tongue out. Speaking of sprites, I saw this interesting post on Twitter while in the process of making this script. The character sprites from Mario 3 and Mario World each seem like they're some sort of modified version of the Mario 2 sprite of all things. Not that it's exactly one-to-one, but for a game that was mostly made to appease an American audience, it's surprising that it influenced the series in its own way. And I approve, honestly. By the time we get to Mario World, he looks so perfect as a character. Like, I imagine Nintendo saw how Mario looked in the second game, looked back at how he looked in the original, and decided, bigger, fatter, cartoonier! Wait, is that why they added like an inflation mechanic in this game? Oh god, what have I just discovered? And honestly, I don't have a whole lot left that I want to say about Mario World. It is just one of the most high-quality games that I have ever played. New or old, this is one of those games that just sticks with you the first time that you play it. And I think it's become one of my favorite games in the overall franchise now. Like, I know I haven't done the whole gambit of the franchise just yet, but it's definitely up there as one of my favorites, just for how good it is. And with that, we've come to the end of our little Mario Safari. We will still be doing one more little check-in with me at Mario 1. Hopefully I've beaten it by now. But for now, let's move on to the end. Did you get the joke? Because Yoshi Safari is... I have stepped into hell itself. I have braved the pits of Tartarus and spoken face to face with Lucifer. And when he spoke, all that came out was Italian gibberish. For hell is empty, save for one inhabitant, and his clothes are stained red with the blood of the innocents. I beat Mario 1. I didn't let it defeat me. I won. I made it all the way to the final Bowser Castle. I stood face to face with that fucking turtle. And I died. On my last life, I died to Bowser. And I could have cheated. I could have rewound. I could have had a save state. I did it for Mario 3. But that would have been defeat. and I will not let him win. I ran back all the way from World 1, and I got back to that castle, and I watched that turtle fall into the goddamn lava. Mario 1 is a difficult video game. His ass is so fat. There are no boss fights, and the level design is boring. I have won. I am still standing. But at what cost? For I am hollow. And I am done with Mario 1. For most of my life, Mario has been a character that I knew in passing. Sure, I'd played some of the games here and there. The first major release I probably remember playing when it came out was Sunshine. But even then, Mario never really captured my attention or imagination through his main series of games. To me, things like Mario 64 or these early platforming titles were just legend. I was far more interested in the Paper Mario and Mario and Luigi games when I was growing up. Running and jumping is just too boring. I need some depth with my plumber piloting, man. But going back to playing these games now, I can see how easily I might have been swayed over to Mario's side if I played his games first. Fate decided that I was going to be a toxic Sonic fanboy, and if things were just a little bit different, I might be writing fanfictions about Mario instead. Not that I write Sonic fanfic, don't take that out of context, whatever you do. Don't worry, my love, they'll never catch on. They're not smart enough. They're YouTube viewers. I think if I had to put these games into a tier list in terms of my favorites for various reasons, I think I'd do it like this. In terms of the overall gameplay, I'd probably go World 2, 3, 1. 2 and 3 are incredibly close to each other in terms of gameplay quality though, so it's not like there's a vast gap between them. One is still down in the dumpster, don't worry about that. In terms of presentation, things like the art and the music in the games, the list isn't all that much different. World is still going to be on top. I was just so insanely charmed by that game that it's hard for me to put it anywhere else. But the rest would be 3, 2, 1 all the way down. As much as I really like 2's gameplay, I enjoyed the overworld and level concepts in Mario 3 way more. Again, mostly. If you disagree with me, yell at me in the comments down below now. Each of these games is incredibly special in their own ways. Even Mario 1, as much as I like to dog on the archaic gameplay as I see it. I think that even if you did like Mario 1 the most, each game has something so unique and revolutionary about each one that it justifies it still being worth playing. In some ways, I do wish I had all of these games when I was a kid to really cement why I love video games so much. In going back to play these games for the first time, I've gained a new appreciation for classic titles like this. It's given me more motivation to actually make videos like this and look back at games from previous generations. And there's so many of them that I missed. So many influential and legendary games that released before my brain could properly understand how to use a controller. Except the N64 controller. That thing is an enigma that archaeologists in 400 years won't be able to figure out. Sincerely though, thank you so much for watching this video all the way to the end if you have. It means a whole lot to me that you listened to almost an hour of some random dude talking about Mario games he's never played. If you want to see more in the future, feel free to hit the subscribe button down there, but just watching the video is more than enough for me. I appreciate it so much. Feel free to go watch some of the other videos. The Sonic ones are great. The Missionary Mice one is fine. It's very context sensitive. You don't really have to watch it if you don't want to. Whatever. And ultimately, hey, I'll see you in the next one. See ya.